Good Tuesday morning, guys. My name is Jerry Miller, and thank you for joining us on the Jerry and Jerry Show. We are live in downtown Charlottesville, Virginia, a hop, skip, and a jump away from the University of Virginia and Thomas Jefferson's Vision, guys. We're right around the corner from the John Paul Jones Arena and Scott Stadium, and today's program is going to be dynamic. You know why? Because you, the viewer and listener, can shape the show and ask wonderful Wally Walker some questions as we take a trip down memory lane and also look to what's in store for this Virginia athletic department. Judah Wickhauer is our director and producer. We always give him props early in the program because Hootie and I get to do what we love. We get to talk sports in a school that we love so dearly. Judah, if you could go to the studio camera and show the star of our show, Jerry Hootie Ratcliffe, the Virginia Sports Hall of Famer, who has done a tremendous job, a heck of a job, welcoming a guest of talented and epic proportions. Hootie, the show is yours, my friend.
Well, it's my pleasure to welcome Wally into the show. I've known him for years. I didn't cover Virginia when he played, but I was covering other schools in the ACC at the time and had the pleasure of watching him play and gotten to know him over the years, and what an incredible, genuine person he is. And I've admired his career and how successful he's been, not only as a player, but as a guy in the front office, and then his starting his own business and being highly successful. And now he's returned to UVA as a deputy AD, and I think your title is about
I know.
14 inches long.
I'm not sure I can get it on a card. I don't have a card yet. I may never have one.
Could never put that on the back of your
exactly.
jersey, that's for sure. But we'd like to welcome in Wally Walker. He rode the 1976 ACC basketball tournament, the Miracle at Landover, and MVP of that tournament, winning the MVP award. Is named after the coach at NC State, who
Everett Case.
Everett Case. I don't know why I can't slip my mind. I'm getting old, I guess. But welcome to the show, Wally.
Thank
welcome
you.
back
Thank
to
you, Jerry.
Charlottesville.
Great to be here.
It's awesome to have you here. And you know, before we get into the meat of the show, I'm going to ask you, I think I mentioned this to you before, but a lot of the people are just wondering, why are you back in Charlottesville? You had such an incredible life out in Seattle. Why would you come back to Charlottesville?
That is true. And we assumed, my wife Linda and I, we were going to be in Seattle forever because we'd been there our whole married lives, and it did have a great setup in Seattle. A couple of things. One, I've been given credit for making a big sacrifice for coming back here, though. That's crazy. That's ridiculous. For those of you who live here, know.
Did he bring the weather with him?
Yes, it does feel like Seattle today. Yeah. A little chilly. I got soaked coming over here. That's okay. I'm used to that. But the reality is, this is a fantastic place to live. So I appreciate people giving me credit for making a sacrifice. For us, it does not feel like a sacrifice. So we love this place, and that's, of course, part of it. But I got triggered last spring, in fact, late last spring into the summer, by what happened with Stanford in the Pac-12. My graduate degree is from the Stanford Business School. That's my second favorite sports program. It's a distant second, but it is second. Mm-hmm. And, there's a sports program, athletic program, that has won the Directors' Cup 90% of the time of the existence of the Directors' Cup. All but 3 years, since 1993, Stanford has had the best overall athletic program in this country. And for them to be orphaned like they were by their conference, the Pac-12, and seemingly not have an answer or anticipate what was going on, got me thinking and talking to folks back here, well, what are we doing to make sure we're out ahead of this? And, there's a lot of happenstance and coincidence, and some people think maybe it isn't coincidence, but I spent a fair amount of time with President Ryan last winter and spring. He was in Seattle, and I was back here, and then there was a Terry Holland Memorial, and I spent some time with Carla and President Ryan and then started talking to them this summer. And one thing led to another, and Carla called me in September about the position I currently have with the title that, is very long.
Well, as deputy AD, I guess that's a pretty big umbrella, but what specifically are your duties
it's
a long title?
Yeah, it's a revenue job. Chief Revenue Officer, I better get that right. but that encompasses all the places where we raise money, which by the way, we still need the traditional means of athletic departments raising money. We still need our boosters to help. And NIL is, of course, at the top of everyone's list now. We're talking to boosters. We need their help there to be competitive. And I'm like, I think most, if not all, didn't like it and went through the stages of grief, if you remember that. The 5 stages you go through: denial and anger, and now I'm at the acceptance phase. It seems like more people are, but some aren't there yet. Well, if we want to compete, we got to accept the fact that's our landscape now. I don't know if it's going to change. I hope some of it does change, but we can't count on somebody else changing the rules. We got to be out ahead of it. Now, so the old-fashioned way, the blocking and tackling of, hey, great UVA supporter, we need your help on this to be competitive. But there are going to be new, innovative, entrepreneurial ways to raise money for NIL that are just starting to come to the fore. We're in those conversations. It's too early to talk about any specifics there, but just know, I hope our listeners will know, that we're looking at all that, and to think we can do things the same way we always have and stay ahead of the situation would be naive. So we're open to it. The administration's open to it. Carl and I talked about it yesterday. We're going to look at all of them, and we're going to hope to be poised to take advantage. Now, getting back to your original question, Jerry, with the change, it's a sea change in college athletics. I don't think I would have come back here if it was the status quo, as much as I love this place. But with all the change, it creates opportunity. Mm-hmm. And that part I like a lot. So, again, I'm here to help us, I hope, find the opportunities to advance competitively. And we're already in a good position, but, again, it's a whole new landscape.
Is the purist, let me throw this to you, is the
Sure.
purist in you I think Hootie and I don't want to speak for my colleague, the best boss I ever had here, worked at the newspaper at one time under his tutelage. We're both purists when it comes to college athletics. I think you and I are. Is the purist in you, Wally, appreciative or concerned of how the landscape has changed so quickly? I look at college sports now, part of me doesn't even recognize it.
That's all valid, and I hear that a lot. I feel it too, to your point and question. Sure. I mean, I like the delineation between amateur and professional sports. I like the fact that colleges were amateur. But guess what? It's all changed. There's a Supreme Court ruling. That's not going to get unraveled, I don't believe. There may be some tweaks to it. The transfer portal, I don't like either. I've used this analogy because I ran a professional sports team for 12 years. If your whole roster were free agents every single year, which is really the case now in college sports, it would be unmanageable at the professional level. Well, I can't speak for our coaches or any coaches that it's unmanageable, but it's much harder. They got to allocate resources, NIL resources, and they got to worry about what's going on, because what we do know, and we know, of course, it's wrong against the rules, but it's happening, where players everywhere are getting contacted during their season. Right. Hey, you're not getting enough shots, you're not getting enough touches, or enough time. We're interested in you, and let's put yourself in the portal at the end of the year, and you'll benefit. Well, that's not right, but it is what it is. So we don't have to play that game. That's a dirty game, but we have to be at least prepared with resources so that the people we want we can attract.
Yeah, that's the madness of it all, is that professional sports actually have better rules now than college sports. It used to be kind of the other way around.
Well, by the way, it's a two-way street, too. And we're going to be hearing more and more of these stories. A player gets offered NIL money, transfers, and maybe he or she gets hurt. Maybe they're not as good as the coach thought, or whomever offered them the money when they get there. Well, the next year, that NIL money for them at that institution, and we already, again, it's happened, and we're going to hear more and more about it, is gone. And, the player has no recourse. There's no contract like you have in the pros. Your player, when you sign a contract, you're protected. So it's going to disadvantage the fact that it was just kind of this Wild West for both the institution and the players. There are going to be a lot of bad stories.
Yeah, and what blew my mind a few weeks ago is when the news came out that Arch Manning was paid $3.2 million this year in NIL money, and he didn't even play.
Yeah.
And Brock Purdy, who may end up being the MVP of the NFL, is making $850,000
for his San Francisco 49ers.
Yeah.
Very well could be the MVP. And how about Matt Rule saying that a quarterback, if you want to get a good quarterback in the transfer portal, it's $1.5 million to $2 million. And even Jim Harbaugh, right before the national championship, when Michigan got a victory, go blue, he was politicking and lobbying that the money should be shared. I mean, he was straight up saying that in the press conference. So it's, as your point, as you've highlighted on this show, Hootie, it is the Wild West.
Oh, yeah, there's no question about it. And
Well, the thing, purist or not, amateur, which again, going back, walking through the snow for 6 miles and barefoot kind of analogy, we're not going back there. But the concept that I think does work and should have probably always worked is for a commercial enterprise to be willing to pay an athlete for endorsing their product. Caitlin Clark, I think, is Exhibit A. The fact that she's making allegedly $1 million plus at Iowa because she stayed for a year is more than she could get paid in the WNBA.
Right.
And that's to her benefit, but it's also the benefit of the product she's endorsing. So why shouldn't she be able to take advantage of that, or any athlete? And we have athletes here doing that too, particularly our as I understand it, our women swimmers. Well, they're the best in the world. They should get commercial opportunities.
sure, I have no problem with that.
But the trickier one is the fact that the NILs are raising money to, basically, it's not pay for play, allegedly, but that, there's a dotted line there. So that's just where we are.
I was told this recently, and I can't validate it, but I was told this by a guy who is a former Power 5 basketball assistant coach. It said that nowadays when you go into a recruit's living room, it used to be you talk to him about the benefits of coming to your school in terms of scholarship and education and playing time and facilities and that stuff. And before that conversation even gets started now, they want to say, how much can you pay me?
Yeah, I've heard that too. It's out there.
That's a sad state.
It is. It is. And, of course, that part is against the rules. Such that the few rules that you have with NIL, that is one that is supposed not to happen. But, of course, it is.
Mm-hmm.
And I completely agree with what you said, Wally, that I have no problem with athletes earning income and revenue for their name, their image, their likeness. That's why we go to the John Paul Jones Arena. That's why we go to Scott Stadium. You mentioned Caitlin Clark. She's selling out arenas anywhere she goes. So she's benefiting. But let's cut to the chase. Iowa is very much benefiting. Another good example was, and this is 10 years ago or so, when Johnny Manziel was Johnny Football. Texas A&M was selling out everywhere he went, and they did. There's a documentary on Netflix about this. They did a total stadium renovation because of the success of Johnny Football on the gridiron. And at that time, he wasn't really able to earn any income, so he had to go outside of the box and do things he probably shouldn't have done in retrospect. So I'll throw this to you here. You are entrusted as potentially the architect of putting this all together, at least one of the ringleaders of putting this all together. What are the first steps, the path of fruition for what you're going to do?
Well, one, I'm going to have a lot of help, and I've got a great boss in Carla Williams who sees it for what it is. We've got to get in this game in a big way, and at this point, we don't know what that means specifically. It just means we got to be touching all the bases. If some entrepreneur comes to us, and this has happened, with an idea that it's never been done before, we can't just dismiss it by saying, oh, it hasn't been done before, we got to worry about the NCAA rules, and of course, University of Virginia is going to abide by the rules. Goes without saying, should go without saying. But that doesn't mean we can't be aggressive in finding ways and whatever those are, because this university has great resources. We've got great supporters. We've got supporters with the means to help, and we've got very financially savvy supporters too. So we need to be looking at everything. And another area I didn't mention, but it is part of my bailiwick too, is sponsorship. Every sports program, amateur, professional, university, anywhere needs sponsors, and almost all of them have them. But a lot of naming inventory and things that have traditionally not been used in college I think, in fact, I know we have to start looking at those because it may not be traditional to see a corporate name somewhere we haven't seen before, but that's our reality. That's more the pro model. And the comparison that I've been using is, the corporate names on NBA jerseys.
Oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
There was a little blowback about that at the time. It's not traditional, whatever pejorative thing people said about having a company name on a jersey. Well, you guys have a vantage point. I remember that lasting a couple of months. Now it's gone away, and people, I don't think even, I guess the sponsors hope they notice, but I don't think people really care. And they shouldn't. But why those are all platforms that we have to start looking at as long as they're allowed.
So you see potentially naming rights for an arena or a stadium potentially, like we see in the NFL.
Well, again, I'll go back. Everything we have to look at. There's nothing, and that doesn't mean, at the end of the day, when you have something major here at the University of Virginia, I know this firsthand, the BOV is going to have a say.
Sure.
But we can't not at least present that, think about it, understand the risk-reward, and all that's on the table.
Look, I love it.
I was going to ask you about the corporate sponsors and that you well addressed. Do you think that the way things have changed also in terms of sports opening up to the world of sports gambling, that we could possibly see casinos involved with sponsoring college teams or are putting their names on buildings?
Well, that's a slippery slope. Again, there is legalized gambling now in many states, not all.
Yeah, in fact, you can bet at a lot of stadiums now.
Yeah. And the owners of the, at least majority shareholders of Las Vegas Sands just bought the Dallas Mavericks.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So where that lands in terms of college sports, I think that one, at least for me, I'm kind of not ready for that one.
Right.
But again, I'll go back. I'll repeat myself. At this point, as you look down the road for the resources going to be required to do it competitively, you can't rule anything out.
And I suppose, like you said, you've got to find some new streams of revenue because for years, I guess, and I'm sure Virginia's not the only one in this boat, but a lot of you guys have to keep going back to the same people.
Yeah.
And at some point, it's not the well hasn't run dry, but at some point, I guess they get exhausted from the asking, right?
Well, I paid a lot of tuition to go to graduate business school, and the term substitution does come to my mind. If you're asking for NIL, does that mean you get less over here for scholarships? If you're going back to the same person, same pot, to use a euphemism?
I think the answer is yes.
I think the answer is yes.
Yeah.
The answer is yes. And so, listen, our boosters, many of them keep up in the ante, but at some point, you've got to find other sources. Yes.
I'm very excited for the potential here. I'm very excited to see how you organize and galvanize everything because you have a mind for business and college athletics and professional sports. How are you going to utilize your experience with the Supersonics? And I want to highlight this for the viewers and listeners, for those that don't know. He was the general manager of the Seattle Supersonics. He served as a minority owner for 12 years. He held titles like president and CEO from 2001 to 2006. He was also the president of the WNBA Seattle Storm starting in 2001. He kind of hinted at the Board of Visitors. What this humble man did not highlight was he was on the Board of Visitors for years from 1997 to 2001. He was on the Board of Visitors. So how do you utilize your executive experience? I mean, you got time with Goldman Sachs. How do you utilize that in this new arena?
That perception has changed. That's perceived
It has
as
a
a
little
mixed
bit.
bag these days. I remember when Goldman Sachs was revered.
The gold standard.
Yeah, and in some ways still is, but we'll move beyond that. I'm just hoping I can help look at things, given my experience, in a way they might not have been looked at before in college athletics. Because again, we're going to have to borrow some from the revenue models of professional teams. And of course, I was in charge of that. 2001, because for my first 7 years with the Sonics, I was just a basketball ops. I was a general manager. I had a title president, general manager, but I was just a cost center. I had a payroll. and we had a budget, and we had to win within that payroll. So that is analogous now to what coaches are having to do with NIL money. They're going to have to allocate that. But by the way, I'm proud to say that we had a really good record. In those 7 years, we had the third best record in the NBA. We also had a low payroll. So
had a good coach in Nate McMillan, if memory serves.
Yes, we do.
Yeah.
Yes, we did. We got to the final. George Karl was in the Hall of Fame, and we just got inducted in the Hall of Fame in 95, 96. We played the Bulls in the final with that team. But where I'm going is this. It's possible we don't have to have the most NIL money. University of Washington, we watched play last night. I know from my Seattle ties and roots, they were not anywhere close to where SEC schools were with NIL money. But you have to allocate correctly, and that's a whole new skill set that I don't know if I'll be asked to do it, but what I do know is it's possible, and I'll continue telling that message to our donors, sponsors, at all, entrepreneurs, that we need to be in the hunt for NIL money, but we have to have a goal, and we have to have an aspiration of how we're going to spend it, but we don't have to have the most money. So we can get off that. But we need more than we have. Let me make that clear.
Sure.
But starting with 2001, I moved over because the franchise was losing money, and not because of the NBA team's payroll. It was a revenue issue. So again, we had to look at everything differently from the revenue side. We had the Storm, which was losing money, and we got that from the worst team in the WNBA to being the WNBA champion within 3 years. Sue Bird, getting number one pick, drafting Sue Bird helped a lot.
Good.
And
that was a great pick.
Yeah, and Lauren Jackson the year before that. Lauren Jackson, U.S. fans may not remember her quite as clearly as, of course, Sue Bird played for 20 years. But Lauren was the best player in the world for a couple of years, Australian player. So anyway, we did that, but we also, just to take, you have to look at synergies. And I got to an organization as the CEO in 2001 where the Storm people were over here, the Sonic people were over here. Well, wait a minute, we're all the same organization. Let's help each other. We have different seasons. And let's help in your off season. Let's help the team that's in season, and vice versa. And of course, my responsibility now is not on the cost side, but you have to be cognizant of that. And to that point, University of Virginia last year finished fourth in the Directors' Cup. We can all be proud of that.
Absolutely.
There's a chart that Steve Pritzker, who's the CFO, showed me that I've said internally we need to demonstrate this more to our boosters, because it lists us as the most efficient athletic department in the country. In other words, the most success on our playing fields, courts, pools, et cetera, relative to our revenue. Okay, that's great. That speaks to good organization, good management, but we still need more revenue because everyone else is generating it different ways.
Yeah, that is something to be proud of. I remember back, early 2000s that I guess John Castine told Craig Littlepage that he wanted Virginia to become the Stanford of the East, and he and John Oliver set out on that trail, and they essentially have become the Stanford of the East in terms of a total athletic department.
Our Olympic sports are excellent.
Yeah.
And we keep winning national championships, and we keep winning more than anybody else in the ACC over, if you look at the right time frame. Of course, we can be biased in our time frame, but that's our reality for quite a while now. It's not just a couple of years. I think it goes back to 2015 or so, if I'm remembering correctly.
Yeah.
That's impressive, and that speaks to, Jerry, I told you this, one of the perks of my new job is I'm meeting the coaches, most of whom I didn't know at all. And after I spend half an hour, 45 minutes, sometimes an hour with them, I'm sitting in my office by myself thinking, I wish I was 18 years old and I could come play for you.
He wants to suit up.
Yeah, put me in, coach. I'm ready to go. Because they're great. They embrace this place. They know, they love it here and embrace the culture. They know because of how we do things, it's not always easy and more challenging, but they all seem to not, well, I'll go back and use that word. They embrace it. Hey, that's who we are, and we can win with this, and we're going to. I love that.
We got questions coming in. This one's from down the road in Scottsville, Virginia, and then we'll head to Richmond, Allentown, Pennsylvania, and Northern Virginia with questions. First, from Scottsville, Philip Dow. How do you keep a high rate of graduation in the work you are doing? And I'll add to his question, while also prioritizing incremental revenue generation. So the last part is me, the first part is Philip.
Yeah, well, I certainly don't ever think, and not for a second, that anything we're doing to generate revenue should be to the detriment of our student athletes getting their education. There are still many, fortunately for us, who care about getting an education here, and the graduation rate is fantastic. That is a point of emphasis and pride, as it should be and always will be here. That's not going to get lost in anything that we're doing to generate revenue. I do think there'll be some NIL demands in terms of time for athletes that are getting paid something. They're going to have to make charitable appearances if they're getting it through the foundation. If they're doing something commercially through a sponsor, they're going to have to do something for them, obviously, to earn the money. In either case, that's a time allocation. I can speak for myself. I did fine academically. Well, I didn't my first year.
Neither did I.
Yeah, but I still found time to play cards and waste time. I didn't tell everyone, not my parents anyway, I know that. So it's a time allocation thing, but our athletes are fantastic. They understand the value of education. So we got to monitor it, but I'm not worried about that one. It's really our job on the revenue side to find ways for them to have things to do to earn money.
Another question for you here. Let's go to Richmond for this one. What does he think of the conference shuffle? Seems like every time I turn on ESPN, another conference is either adding teams or potentially folding altogether.
Well, I'll go back to what I said earlier, the Pac-12 and Stanford. Mm-hmm. And I've always loved Oregon State and Washington State because they're in small towns. They don't have the big urban influence that most of the rest of the Pac-12. They've competed well in some sports and time without the resources. And for them to be left without a conference, I hate it. I hate what's happened to the Pac-12. And I'm really worried that if we're not strong and we're not competitive in some ways, particularly on the revenue side, we could be vulnerable both as a university and as a league to what's happened to the Pac-12. That's why I'm here. And we got to avert that. And again, I'll give credit to administration, President Ryan and Carla Williams, because they see it. And of course, Jim Ryan's got a ringside seat with being president of the ACC presidents with what's going on with the squawking in Florida State. And I don't expect it's going to end. But fortunately, ACC was better run than the Pac-12. The Pac-12, it was so easy for the schools to leave that they left. They were incentivized by money, and I like the fact that ACC is much more punitive to leave. And the fact you lose kind of the geographic rivalries, the legacy of the Pac-12 was Bill Walton we talked about earlier before the show.
Might be evaporating.
Might be evaporating.
Yeah.
If we all had $10 for every time Bill said conference of champions, we'd all retire. But it happened to be true. Stanford, USC, UCLA are still the top three for national championships, and I hope Virginia can get in that conversation.
Yeah, it is a shame to see what happened to that conference, and I think it had poor leadership. The last two commissioners, I think, just didn't understand modern-day college athletics and didn't understand what they had.
I can't sit here and say I know all the nuances, but they turned down deals that end up the schools getting worse deals than what they turned down. And for the DMA is the term used for the demographics as TV rights holders decide how much they're going to pay for those rights. The Pac-12 had all these urban areas on the West Coast and in the mountain region too. And for them not to maximize that was just an incredible miss.
I mean, a perfect example of the changing landscape is one of the NFL playoff games this weekend is streamed exclusively on the Peacock app.
Yeah.
It's not available on standard television. And we've watched Thursday Night Football with the NFL stream exclusively on Amazon Prime. So the traditional model of positioning call to action messages, branding and advertising opportunities on broadcast television may be yesteryear. Apple TV, for example, was a key player this past summer with the conference landscape shifting, especially on the West Coast. So this is an interesting question for you here. Digital and social media and streaming, how it pertains to this. I'm 42 years old here, and I think I'm watching more sports, and I have an iPhone, for those that are just listening in my hand, more sports on my iPhone than actually on a box in front of a couch.
Look at that.
It's amazing. And I know our two youngest sons, my wife and I's two youngest sons, they're certainly going to be in that point as they get into their passion for UVA sports, because their dad is a diehard UVA guy. So I'll throw that to you: streaming and social and digital and anywhere you want to go on that topic.
You know,
This show is streaming, for example.
Yeah, well, it's really topical for the revenue opportunities and the future of sports. I'll go a couple places, but I'll start with the NBA. The NBA's media rights deal, which used to be called a TV deal, is up this spring. And I stay in touch with people in the NBA league office because of my years in Seattle. I'm also hopeful that Seattle's going to get an NBA franchise back. In fact, I'm very, very optimistic about that. But what's one of the gating issues, if not the primary one, in the economics for a new franchise, expansion franchise, is how big the new media rights deal is going to be. And the new bidders on that, you know, the traditional carriers, we all know, have been ESPN, ABC, TNT. NBA has its own cable network also, NBA TV. But the new players, are the usual suspects. You name them: Apple, Amazon, Hulu, Netflix. Did I say Amazon?
You did.
Okay,
You did.
I'll say them again because I live in Seattle. Those are all huge, well-financed companies that are now showing an inclination, if not strong interest, in live sports.
In sports.
Because that's how you drive your subscribers, the people.
Because you watch it in real time.
Yeah, and they're willing to
Stay
subscribe
sticky.
to Amazon Prime.
Yeah.
In part because they're going to get some live sports content. Well, whatever the dollar figure that the NBA negotiates with those streamers, in addition to the traditional carriers who are going to be there, who are still interested, I'm told, and I saw Bob Iger from Disney talk about it. They're very interested still in the NBA, and they've been a traditional partner with the NBA. Well, that number will dictate owners' interest in diluting, aka expanding, their NBA revenue streams, and really how much an expansion fee is going to be. So the NBA believes, and rightfully, and there's never been this much scrutiny on the NBA media rights deal for that reason, because we got CNBC here in the background. Mm-hmm. They talk about it all the time because it's so germane to the companies that they follow from a business perspective.
Yeah.
What they're going to do with sports streaming. Now, what does that mean for college sports? Well, it's a potential for greater rights deals for conferences in the NCAA, although that's probably all going to change in structure. I'm not here to tell you what that means, but almost by definition, it has to change. The conferences and now players, have to get, a bigger piece of that is how I see it. They're not asking me, but that's how I see it. But where I think there's going to be a practical application for universities and conferences, but let's keep it at the university level, for the preseason tournaments. The best known, one at Atlantis in the Bahamas, Nassau, mm-hmm. Maui Classic, but there are a lot of them. UVA played in Fort Myers last year, where the traditional model has been, okay, it's a nice trip for your players, you get some TV exposure, your boosters may want to go to a warm place and spend a week. That's great, but guess what? That's expensive for the universities. What I'm hearing, and reliably so, is a lot of entrepreneurs are looking for ways to both attract universities to come play in a tournament, pay their expenses because the content is valuable, do a deal with a streamer to generate the content. Of course, that would include sponsors. They're going to have sponsors to help pay. But the streamers are interested in that content and willing to pay for it. So therefore, that money will flow back in a different, better way for universities. So there's a benefit there. There's nothing tangible yet, but those conversations are beginning.
If you think about it, and this is my passion here, media and monetizing media, especially digital, social, and mobile. We're doing a talk show right now with one of the greatest basketball players in Virginia history, who, as Hootie said prior to the program, has arguably the most professional success of any UVA athlete, both on the court or the gridiron, on the court in your case, and then in the front office, mm-hmm. right? And we're doing the show while 13 states are watching us. I'm looking at the heat map. I'm talking to the commenters while we're doing the show, literally interacting with them. For example, Jill Cavanaugh is watching the program right now. She says Hootie and Walter, and it's giving you guys some props from her home.
I know Jill.
Yeah, I know you do. I know, that's why I mentioned her. I picked one of the
Jill.
viewers that you knew that you would know, highlighted her name. I see so much potential in this. I mean, for instance, the non-revenue sports here. If someone could create a business model where, take the squash team. I'm a huge squash fan. Where the Virginia squash team was traveling to, say, play Harvard or Princeton or Yale. There's a micro market of fans that would love to see those matches played. But right now, all they can do is follow it digitally online with a box score, if you may. If someone could put a streaming business together to follow this team as it goes away from the MacArthur Squash Center, stream them online, you could clearly monetize it with the professional brands like Harrow or Dunlop or Technofiber would be all over this. The University of Virginia would win. The athletes would win. The sponsors would win. I mean, there's just so much potential here. It's an untapped market. So I'll throw a question to you from Washington, D.C., watching to the program right now. This is Spencer who's asking this question. Does your guest think that there's going to be a committee or a group or organization, maybe a subset of the NCAA, that is formed to potentially police or organize this so there's a little bit more structure when it comes to digital and social monetization? Does that really exist right now? I mean,
well, it's a great question, and I've said, all along through this process that we keep using the Wild West metaphor, and it works. It applies. It's correct for where we are currently in college sports. But you have to have a central organizing body of some kind to enforce rules, to settle disputes, to put on tournaments. I mean, that's why you have a league office in all the professional sports. You have to have that because you have to have officiating, and you got to put on the games, and the games have to be fair, and people have to trust that the games are going to be fair. So the NCAA has clearly lost some juice based on this ruling because they would try to keep it the old way of purely amateurism, and their revenue model is going to be under scrutiny by the universities as universities and leagues are looking for more revenue. So where that goes, but I hope it's the NCAA because they have the legacy. I think that would be the easiest and simplest way to do it. But you can't have college sports without some central governing body. I hear all this discussion about the conferences are going to go and going to their own way in the Power Five, or you have football over here. Well, okay, you can talk about all that in theory, but you still got to have that central organizing body, and there's a cost to that, and someone's got to decide who it is and how much to pay for it.
Well said. More questions coming in fairly quickly. This is from James Watson, who's a UVA graduate. How does the panel think it's going to play out for non-money generating teams to travel all the way to California to play back and forth on the East Coast to the West Coast during the week? It's a good question right there.
Well, on the surface of it, it makes no sense. Of course, student athletes having to travel and go to the West Coast, and I've been on the West Coast for nearly 50 years, and I know it's not easy.
Exactly.
Basically, from Seattle.
Recently, it's not easy.
Yes, I told you that story. Basically, you can't get to Charlotte from Seattle, Washington. Eventually, you do, but it's not easy. So, no, that's not the spirit of leagues and college competition. Well, there are some West Coast trips to have to do them regularly. But I know the universities are looking hard at ways to mitigate the travel, to do things more, on the same trip, or meet for some sports. You can't do it for all in the middle of the country in some way, shape, or form. So you are mitigating it, but it's not ideal. No one thinks it is. It's just the reality of the economics, and those are driven by football and actually football TV.
This question's come in from Brian, who's a 78 University of Virginia graduate. Please ask him about the ACC Tournament Championship and what he remembers and his time at UVA during winning an ACC Tournament Championship, and what it was like to make an NCAA tournament, the first one in Wahoo history. Great question from Brian.
Well, I'm still sort of amazed, but pleasantly so, that people remember it. It's so long ago now. But I clearly do. I remember a lot about it. And that ACC tournament special, which they did an incredible job on that.
Yeah,
they ran last year, those 10 episodes.
It was awesome.
One of the
really
best
was.
things I've ever seen.
Yeah.
And they came out, their crew of 3 came out and spent a whole day in Seattle. I was their only interview in the Northwest. In fact, when they called to say, do you know anybody else that's out here? I'm like, I don't know. So they took their time, they did their research, they spent a ton of money to produce it, and they got it right. Of course, they were complimentary to us and to me, so I liked it. But just the other history of the ACC, much of which I didn't know, going back to the 50s, and we've already mentioned Everett Case. I knew the name. I've got a nice plaque with his name on it, with my name on it. But I didn't know all he'd done to get the league to what it became. So I can remember, and Billy Langland and I were best friends, but I can remember even after we won the first tournament game that year, we beat NC State, which we'd never beaten in my 4 years at UVA, and it ensured us a winning record. And I said,
And that's when they had David Thompson too.
no, that was the year after David.
That's right.
But they were ranked. They were ranked. They had Kenny Carr, who
But
was.
you had lost to them in previous.
Yeah,
years.
we lost them in 2 regular seasons. And they were ranked. They were ranked whatever, the 18th, 19th, something like that.
Yeah.
So a good team, a lot of NBA guys on it. And he and I saying after the game, we were roommates too. Okay, we got a winning record. Let's win the next game. We never beat Maryland either in my 4 years here, and so that was obviously we're playing in Maryland. So for us, we did a good job of focusing a game at a time. But I remember the satisfaction, of course, and to win it all. Of hey, we did something for this university. We love the University of Virginia, and again, I'll say it. I can't believe people remember it or want to go back to it as much as they have, but I love it. But it does, even if they didn't want to remember it, the fact that we know that we did something that hadn't been done before is really gratifying.
There are more viewers and listeners going into the history vault. This one from Lauren, who's watching, can he put in perspective winning 2 NBA championships versus an ACC championship, and what meant more to him? That's a heck of a question.
It's a great question.
Yeah.
Well, I can say unequivocally, emotionally, for me, winning an ACC championship was the most emotional experience I've ever had in sports. Just for that reason, it was cathartic.
That's the pinnacle of your sports career?
On an emotional basis. On an emotional basis.
Wow.
Yeah, not even close. Just because, again, we've done something. Now, I also was fortunate to be on 2 NBA championship teams. Portland in '77 had never made the playoffs before. So, for us to go from never making the playoffs to winning the NBA championship. And Seattle, we won the championship in '79. But the '77-'78 season, we were 2-10. We were 2-10 when I got traded there in November of 1977. So we went from the worst team in the NBA to the finals that same year, and then we lost in Game 7 at home to remember when they called them the Bullets, the Washington Bullets, to win it the next year. So those were gratifying. I'm not trying to diminish that and just being a part of those, because those were the first ever for those cities, communities too. But again, the emotional attachment for this place, and I hope it is, well, it's not for me to say, led to some of the other things that have happened here. I'll continue to think it helped.
Don't you have a cool story about you ran into a guy in the last few years who helped carry you off the floor or something that night in Greensboro or Landover? Rather.
Yeah, I met JPJ. This is 5 or 6 years ago, and a guy taps me on the shoulder and says, "Do you remember me?" I said, "Well, frankly, no. So, help me out here." He said, "Well, you were on my shoulders for about 15 minutes. He's the guy who just hoisted me. Of course, we didn't have any rehearsal for winning a championship. We didn't contemplate it, hadn't done it before. He was a big guy, but still, I was on his shoulders for like 15 minutes. And I did say at the time, I said, thanks for saying something. In my defense of not recognizing you, I never really did see your face."
I got a personal question for you. Gary Payton, one of my favorite basketball players of all time. What was it like to be in the front office when the glove was in his heyday?
Well, he was great. When I became a general manager in '94, he hadn't really, he was really good, but he was a really good defender, and you didn't know he was going to be a 20-point scorer. There wasn't anybody that I heard that was saying, that guy, he's going to the Hall of Fame, and he's going to be one of the top 75 players of all time. I had done the broadcast for the team for the previous 2 years, so I saw him a lot in person, which was I'm glad, because I've seen him every day. You really appreciate how tough he was, but he just kept getting better, particularly at the offensive end, where by the year 2000, and we did our own statistical analysis and on productivity, on our system, and I think it was pretty good on the analytics, he was the best guard in the game. We re-signed him in 95. After the 96 season, we went to the finals. He was a free agent. So it was my job. I got him signed for 7 years. I had people saying, because Gary could be a hard personality, because he was demanding.
Absolutely.
He yelled at people.
Yeah.
Teammates would get frustrated with him. I had teammates come in my office, players I respected, to say, Gary, I'm like, hey, Gary's going to be here. Your job is to get along with Gary, not vice versa, because we're not going to be able to replace him. What I was thinking when I wasn't saying, well, we'll probably replace you.
Yeah, I know.
So we did get him signed for 7 years. Now, I also was in the front office, so I wasn't the general manager when I'll tell you the story. When we traded Gary, he was 34 years old.
Was that to the Heat?
No, it was the Milwaukee Bucks.
Oh, the Bucks, that's right, yeah.
So he was 34 years old, and he was a free agent at the end of the year. He was 34 years old. He was still good. He wasn't as good as he was a few years before, but he's still really good. I'm not saying that as a criticism. It's just Father Time is undefeated.
Sure.
So right at the trade deadline, we have a conversation with Rick Sund, who's the general manager who was reporting to me, but he was the one doing the deal. Calls me the day before the trade deadline, says, Milwaukee's interested. And Ray Allen's in the conversation. I'm like, Ray Allen was 27 years old and already been an all-star. And at that point, we didn't know he was going to be a Hall of Fame player in the top 75 either. Right. So a blockbuster trade. Hard trade, because Gary was the icon of the franchise, but we weren't sure we were going to be able to keep him next summer, and he was older. So I know there's going to be negative blowback. So I come into the office the next morning. Social media wasn't as big then, but there was sports talk radio. The newspapers. You guys we remember were still widely read and followed. I didn't read anything. I didn't listen to sports talk radio. So I came in early, and our head of marketing is there when I walk in. I said, "Well, how many responses did we get last night?" And there were email responses coming into the office. He said, "We got a little over 800." Well, those 800 were a lot in those days.
No question.
So I said, well, we just got Ray Allen. He's an all-star player. He's 27. Did we get 10% favorable? Shook his head no. I said, 5% favorable? Shook his head no. I said, do we get any favorable of the 800-plus emails we got? He said, no.
Wow.
He said, not a one was in favor of it. And he said, and by the way, tonight's game, we've got security assigned to you. I said, okay, I'm probably better off not knowing what those emails said, right? I said, no, that would be wise. So that's how bad it was. And then Ray just had
blew up,
had great years for us. He averaged 25, 5 and 5, and then just he made subsequent to that trade, he made the All-Star team 7 years. So it was a really good trade. It was
a great trade.
Yeah, it was a great trade.
Yeah, in hidesight, you won the trade.
Yeah, it didn't feel that way for a while as a Seattle resident, as a team president, but it did work out.
How about this question for you? The greatest basketball player you've played alongside, on the court with, and the greatest basketball player you've seen from the front office. Front office, I have an idea who you're going to pick here.
Yeah, I saw that a little too much in 96. We'll start there since we already referenced it.
We're going to go MJ?
Yeah. Our team, our Seattle team in 95, 96, Gary Payton, Sean Kemp, Detlef Schrempf, Sam Perkins, UVA fans will remember, Hersey Hawkins. It was Nate McMillan went on the coach.
Fantastic team.
Yeah. We were 64-18 after starting 6-5. So that at the time was the 10th best record in the history of the NBA regular season. So teams that have won 64 games in the past won the championship. Well, we played the Bulls. That it's pretty much consensus. I know it's not unanimous. That was the greatest team of all time, the 95-96 Bulls. So we play them, and we'd already beaten them once in the regular season. We'd actually beaten them in the preseason too. It doesn't matter, but anyway, we had some confidence going in. Nate McMillan was hurt, but we did win 2 games. But Michael was Michael. He was such a great competitor, and so he was the greatest I saw. And he was before my time, but I became friends with him. I hope I'm not using that term loosely, but Bill Russell lived in Seattle, and I used to ask him to join me for a game every year, and he would accept, and I would just sit and ask him questions. And he would tell stories about his days with the Celtics and the NBA, and that was fascinating. So just be around that kind of greatness, after the fact was a real treat and honor for me. Now, I play with a lot of Hall of Famers in the NBA, including Ralph Sampson. His rookie year was my last year in the NBA. No one would pay me after that. When he was healthy, Bill Walton, my rookie year, and that was a big if because he was hurt a lot. But he stayed healthy through the playoffs and through, I think he played 60 regular season games that year. He was just so easy to play with. He was covered up defensive mistakes. If you're open for a second, he had the ball at the high post, the ball was on you, at the right place at the right time. He just had such a feel. So my best friend in Seattle was Jack Sikma. The longevity of just being there every night. Dennis Johnson was on our championship team, was a great player. Gus Williams was an all-pro player. Bill Walton, when healthy for that year, was the best I played with.
What do you make of LeBron basically playing almost at the top of his game at nearly 40?
It's incredible.
It's incredible.
It's incredible. Now, Mike was the best player I've seen. I think he's still the greatest of all time. But LeBron's got to be in that conversation now. If he wins another title, there's going to be a groundswell. Again, that'll be an argument. We can have bar fights about that, about who's better. But for him to do it all these years, I went to see him in high school. The NBA All-Star game that year was in Philly. LeBron was playing Carmelo Anthony's team, Oak Hill.
Yep.
They were playing, it was in Trenton. It was only about an hour drive. So all the NBA people in the afternoon, Sunday afternoon, drove up to watch LeBron James. None of us had laid eyes on him before.
Right.
And so we go in this little arena. And Carmelo, by the way, in the game had 35, 38 points. And he wasn't even noticed because we hadn't laid eyes on LeBron before. And I can still remember clearly a guy named R.C. Buford, who will be in the Hall of Fame one day as an executive from San Antonio Spurs. I've known R.C. since I showed him around here when I was a first year, and he visited as a recruit. So we've been friends. That's a long time. So my cell phone rings, and we stay in touch. And I'm Seattle, he's San Antonio, so we're rivals in a way, but we're friends. My cell phone rings. He doesn't say hello. No greeting, no how you been. All he said was, "Can you believe what we just saw?" That's how good he was. That's how incredible an athlete he was. For the first time we laid eyes on him at that point, I was a junior in high school.
And the crazy thing about that, you mentioned Carmelo was kind of under the radar because LeBron was that good. Carmelo goes to Syracuse and wins a national championship.
The next year.
The next year.
After we saw him. Yeah.
After you see him.
Yeah.
Most outstanding player of the Final Four, Carmelo, and then goes out to be a Hall of Fame basketball player. In his career. Questions are coming in. This is a great one from a mom who is watching in the Baltimore area. She says, "My son is a standout athlete. How can standout athletes in high school compete in this day and age when it seems like the transfer portal is becoming the priority?" Great question.
Great question. I think what every kid should do, no matter what's going on with the system that we're currently in, is just prepare themselves to be as good as they can be. Everything else take care of themselves. Go to a place where it feels like the right fit, where you're going to get an education. I played 8 years in the NBA, 9 years professionally, including 1 year in Italy. You're still 30 years old, 31 years old. You got to make a living. You got to go do something. So the value of the education still should be factored in. I know it gets lost in the shuffle often, and probably too often, but for that mom, make sure that the backup plan is in place. And, I think it was Tubby Smith. You guys would know better than I was, but I saw a great quote from Tubby about the transfer portal that said, what are we teaching these kids? All they're learning is if there's a little adversity, they're not getting what they want, they leave.
Yeah, that was Tubby.
You got to battle through the adversity. I mean, that's a life lesson that, is well learned if doesn't work out for you right away. And so I hope we don't, well, I think we have lost some of it with the transfer portal, but I hope we get back to people who are willing to face adversity, to battle through and get to the other side with success there. So anyway, that young man, young woman should just, practice hard, be as good as they can be, and just go get it.
Todd Rath watching the program, you may be able to close a deal here. He's the owner of Blue Toad Hard Cider in Nelson County watching the program. He says this is a little off topic, but what does Wally Walker think of the chances of his Purdue Boilermakers making a deep run after losing to a 64 seed, much like UVA? Maybe we can tie in UVA's bounce back from getting ousted early in the tournament to the next year winning the big dance into that answer.
Well, one of the, of course, all great coaches take every kernel they can to motivate their team. And what Tony Bennett did with that first round loss was a coaching clinic, a lesson in psychology to turn that into, hey, we can't get to where we're going. You guys remember the saying better than I would, without going through the adversity that we dealt with there.
Right.
And to take that incredibly painful event and turn it into a national championship motivation, that's brilliant. So to the degrees anybody's watching, and I'm sure Purdue or anybody else is, they should learn that lesson too.
And Matt Painter had a ringside seat for that too.
Yes, he did.
They lost
By the
to
way,
Virginia in overtime.
that game might have been the single best game I've ever seen, the Purdue-Virginia game.
The only one I think I ever saw better was when NC State beat UCLA in triple overtime in the national semifinals in '74.
That was good, and as I was saying that, I was there. In fact, Billy Langlow and I sat in person for NC State Maryland ACC final in 1974.
Yeah.
That was an incredible game.
Yeah.
First thing you did, question for me, first thing you did when you got back to Charlottesville? What was the first thing you did? Restaurant, activity, trip down memory lane, all the above?
I was back in December for a couple of weeks. I was here in October for some, but I've got some really close friends here. A lot of my closest friends from my undergraduate days have moved back here. So it's always getting together with them and seeing them early on. But for us, I already told you guys the story before we went on air. We got here with our dogs. They'd never been on a plane. And, of course, we're totally mystified what was going on with our life. They arrived in Charlottesville. So it was great fun for me to introduce them to them, this town I love. My wife has been here a fair amount over the years. But for her now to find the Boar's Head trails, to take our Bernese Mountain Dog for a run. I mean, and for her to come back and say, that's great. Max, our Bernese Mountain Dog, loved it. It was just those little things that, matter.
This guy is a Renaissance man. You are still got your broadcasting chops. I mean, the interview has been a breeze. Why don't we close down the interview, guys? We've gone an hour straight of just fun with wonderful Wally Walker here. Close it down like this. What can we expect? Wind us down here. What can we expect with your tenure here? What's on your short list?
Well, I hope I can help us be at a place where we're not vulnerable to whatever happens, the travails of the conferences, the system, NIL, transfer portal, conference realignment, NCAA changes, whatever that is. We need to be out ahead and have the resources to be out ahead so we are not beholden to anybody else. The University of Virginia has got to be standalone, solvent, have the revenue streams that we need so that we can, whatever comes our way, we've got to be ready for it. And we have that capability. I would say this, the other thing that really attracted me to coming back was to hear Carla Williams, my boss, say, I want us to have the best athletic department in the country. Well, why shouldn't that be our aspiration? Why shouldn't we be thinking about that? So any help I can do to help us get there, we got a running start at it a lot of ways. We obviously the places to improve. Your listeners don't need me to elaborate on those, but we've got a lot of great people in place, so that's the right aspiration.
Fantastic interview, Hootie.
Absolutely, and I agree with what you said about being the number one athletic department in the country. I mean, Virginia wants to strive to be number one at everything else, so why not that?
Why not? What are we doing if we're not striving for that?
And I think the department's close. I mean, it's like a whiskers away from being here. I mean, we look at some of the Olympic sports; they're there.
They are there.
I mean, we have an abundance of riches here with this athletic department, and maybe it's just a matter of prioritizing or understanding what is right here in our home that we have. I mean, from baseball to soccer to lacrosse to squash. I mean, we got top 10 teams and perennial national championship contenders all over the department. This has been a breeze. You've made this seriously easy. Wally
that's
Walker,
that's why
guys.
I'm here. Make it easy.
It was fantastically easy. Jerry Ratcliffe set this interview up. He's the star of our show, The Jerry and Jerry Show. His publication, jerryratcliffe.com. I'm on that website every day, jerryratcliffe.com. What do you have in the hopper, Hootie, on jerryratcliffe.com?
Oh, we're just going to try to do some looks at the basketball team and some of the personnel. They don't play again until Saturday down at Wake Forest, and keeping our eye on the football transfer portal because they've been pretty active. They've signed 4 guys or gotten 4 commitments rather in the last 4 days. So Tony Elliott's been a pretty busy man.
Yeah.
Wake Forest, guys, on the docket for Saturday. I believe that's a 2 p.m., and I'm going to confirm right now. It is a 2 p.m. tip-off. The Demon Deacons, a team that never won a discount. Hootie, thank you. Absolutely fantastic. Judah Wickhauer, the man behind the scenes. For Wally and Jerry Ratcliffe, this is the Jerry and Jerry Show, airs wherever you get your social media and streaming content. Thank you kindly for joining us. We're back in the saddle next Tuesday at 10:15 a.m. right here on the I Love CVille Network. So long, everybody. Take care. It was awesome. He's going to tell us when the mics and cameras